Have you ever had the strange feeling that something is off with the world, even though everything seems normal on the surface? You wake up, follow your routine, meet expectations, do what you're supposed to do. Yet underneath it all, there's a quiet unease you can't quite name. It's as if life is moving, but you're not fully inside it, like you're watching your own experience from a slight distance. You try to explain it away. Stress, age, circumstances, but the feeling persists. There's a sense that reality is thinner than it should be, that you're functioning but not fully alive, that despite doing everything right, something essential is missing. What if that feeling isn't confusion at all? What if it's awareness knocking, asking you to look beyond the surface of the world you were taught to accept? From the moment you began to understand the world, it was presented to you as something already finished, solid, defined, a place where everything has a name, a label, a rule. You were taught that reality is what you can touch, measure, compare, and control. Anything outside that frame was dismissed as imagination, coincidence, or fantasy. Over time, this version of reality stopped feeling like one perspective and started feeling like the only one. This didn't happen by accident. A limited reality is easier to manage, easier to predict, easier to repeat. When consciousness is trained to see life as purely material, linear, and external, it naturally focuses on survival, performance, and validation. You learn to ask, what do I need to do to fit in, instead of, what am I actually perceiving? Your attention is gently but constantly guided outward, away from the deeper mechanisms shaping your experience. Notice how early this begins. School rewards memorization over perception. Productivity is valued more than awareness. Speed is praised, stillness is treated as laziness. Even curiosity is tolerated only when it leads to a practical outcome. The subtle message is clear. Trust systems, not your inner signal. Follow instructions. Don't look too closely. Don't question the frame itself. And so you adapt. You learn to compress your attention into narrow channels. You become fluent in reacting, but less skilled at observing. Life becomes a sequence of problems to solve rather than a field to explore. Over time, this conditioning feels natural, even comforting. The world appears predictable, but at a cost. Your sense of possibility quietly shrinks. Here is a simple experiment you can notice right now. Think of how often your day is structured around external cues, notifications, schedules, expectations, deadlines. Then notice how rarely you are invited to sense your own internal state without trying to fix it. That imbalance is not personal failure, it's design. A consciousness that is always responding has little energy left to expand. This version of reality trains you to believe that change must happen out there first. When circumstances improve, then you can feel better. When you know more, then you'll be confident. When everything aligns, then you'll be at peace. But this logic quietly places your inner world in a permanent waiting room. Your consciousness becomes secondary, reactive, dependent. There is also a more subtle limit embedded here. The idea that you are separate from others, separate from nature, separate from the flow of events. When reality is framed as something happening to you rather than through you, you naturally feel small inside it. You negotiate with life instead of participating in it. You manage symptoms instead of questioning the structure that produces them. Pause for a moment and observe how your body responds to the idea that reality might not be fixed but responsive. You may notice resistance, skepticism, even discomfort. That reaction itself is evidence of how deeply the current model is installed. A limited reality defends itself by feeling normal. This doesn't mean the world you see is fake. It means it's partial, like looking at the ocean through a keyhole and assuming you've seen all there is. The rules you were taught explain how to function within a narrow band of experience, but they say very little about how experience itself is generated. They describe outcomes, not origins. And once you start noticing this, something shifts. You begin to see that many of your perceived limitations are not walls but agreements, assumptions repeated so often they hardened into truth. You didn't consciously choose them, but you've been living inside them for a long time. Here's another quiet observation to try. Recall a moment when your internal state clearly altered how the world appeared, when fear made everything feel threatening, or calm made the same situation feel manageable. The external facts didn't change, but reality did. That alone suggests that what you call the world is not independent of the consciousness experiencing it. If reality were truly fixed and objective in the way you were taught, your inner state wouldn't matter nearly as much as it does. This is where the cracks begin to show. The old model cannot fully explain why attention changes perception, why expectation shapes outcomes, why meaning alters experience more powerfully than circumstance. It works well enough to keep things running, but not well enough to explain why so many people feel an invisible ceiling they can't name. And here's the crucial point. What's holding you back isn't a lack of intelligence or effort. It's the operating system you were given, a system that prioritizes control over awareness, explanation over experience, certainty over coherence. It keeps you busy inside a narrow range while convincing you that the range is all there is. Once you sense that, even faintly, the old reality starts to feel thin, incomplete, like a map missing entire territories. And that discomfort isn't a problem to solve. It's a signal. Because the moment you realize the reality you know was designed with limits, a new question naturally arises. If this is a constructed frame, then what exactly is keeping it in place inside you? Most people assume that awakening is blocked by a lack of information. If they could just read the right book, hear the right explanation, connect the right ideas, something would finally click. But notice how much information you already have. You've heard about mindfulness, presence, energy, conditioning, trauma, habits, perception. None of this is new, and yet knowing hasn't dissolved the feeling of being stuck. That's because the obstacle was never ignorance. It's programming. Programming doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like control. It feels like common sense. It's the background logic you rarely question because it runs automatically, shaping how you interpret reality before you have time to notice you're interpreting at all. It's not what you think about consciously. It's how thinking itself has been trained to move. You can see this in the way certain thoughts arrive already loaded with emotion. A single idea, I'm behind, this is risky, people will judge me, can tighten the body instantly without debate. That reaction isn't the result of careful reasoning. It's conditioned response, a reflex installed through repetition, reinforcement, and emotional charge. Programming works by shrinking the range of what feels possible. It doesn't tell you, you are limited. It whispers, be realistic. It rewards conformity with safety and punishes deviation with discomfort. Over time, the nervous system learns which thoughts feel acceptable and which feel dangerous, regardless of whether they're true. Here's something subtle to notice. When a new perspective challenges your identity or habits, does your first reaction feel like curiosity or like defense? That defensive contraction is not intelligence protecting truth. It's programming protecting familiarity. The system isn't trying to keep you asleep, it's trying to keep you predictable. This is why awakening isn't a dramatic moment where everything suddenly becomes clear. If it were about ignorance, a single insight would be enough. Instead, awakening feels more like noticing patterns you didn't realize were patterns. You begin to see how often your reactions are preloaded, how rarely your responses are chosen fresh. Consider how quickly you explain yourself to yourself. An uncomfortable emotion appears, and immediately a story follows, a justification, a blame, a reason. That story feels personal, but it's mostly recycled language, inherited assumptions, cultural scripts. The explanation arrives so fast that it seems inseparable from the feeling itself. That speed is the signature of programming. Another quiet experiment. Notice how often you equate familiarity with truth. Ideas you've lived with for years feel right, even if they keep producing the same results you claim to want to move beyond. Meanwhile, unfamiliar perspectives feel suspicious, even before you've examined them. This isn't discernment. It's conditioning defending its territory. Programming also disguises itself as personality. I'm just like this. That's how I've always been. This is just my nature. But what you call personality is often a collection of adaptive strategies that once kept you safe. They may have been intelligent responses to earlier environments, but intelligence doesn't mean permanence. Notice the difference between a thought that arises and the sense that you must obey it. That sense of inevitability is learned. You were trained to treat thoughts as commands rather than events, as instructions rather than suggestions, and the more consistently you follow them, the stronger the pathway becomes. This is why trying to think your way out rarely works. The mind attempting to free itself using the same conditioned loops is like a maze trying to solve itself by rearranging its walls. You may get temporary relief, even moments of clarity, but the structure remains intact. There's also a deeper layer, emotional programming. Certain feelings have been labeled as unacceptable, dangerous, or weak, so when they arise, the system moves quickly to suppress, reframe, or escape them. But what's avoided doesn't disappear. It runs in the background, influencing perception from the shadows. Pay attention to what feels off limits to feel fully. That boundary marks a place where programming is strongest. None of this is a flaw. It's how learning works. The nervous system optimizes for efficiency. Repetition becomes automation. Automation becomes identity. The issue isn't that programming exists, it has to. The issue is unconscious programming running your life while you believe you're choosing. Awakening begins not with rejecting the system, but with seeing it operate in real time. The moment you catch a reaction forming before the story attaches to it. The moment you sense a belief tightening your body before you agree with it. These moments are small, but they're disruptive in the best way. And here's the paradox. Programming loses power not when you fight it, but when you observe it without immediately acting it out. Observation introduces space. Space weakens compulsion. Over time, that space becomes an option you didn't know you had. But as soon as you start noticing these patterns, another challenge appears. Even when you see the programming, it keeps playing. Awareness doesn't instantly dissolve it. And that can feel discouraging, until you realize that what you're touching now is not just thought, but the deeper link between your inner state and what shows up around you. Because once programming is visible, a more unsettling question emerges. If these internal patterns shape how you react, choose, and perceive, then how much of the external reality you call your life is quietly mirroring them back to you? At first, this idea sounds poetic, maybe even comforting, but also unrealistic. You look around and see concrete facts, people, events, problems, opportunities. Bills don't feel symbolic. Traffic doesn't feel metaphysical. Other people's behavior certainly doesn't feel like it has anything to do with your inner world. And yet, when you slow down enough to observe honestly, cracks appear in that assumption. Start with something simple. Think about 2 days in your life that were objectively similar. Same job, same city, same responsibilities, but felt completely different. On one day, everything seemed heavy. Small obstacles felt personal. Conversations drained you. On another day, the same environment felt manageable, even supportive. Nothing significant changed outside. Something shifted inside. This isn't coincidence. It's perception organizing experience. Your internal state acts like a lens. It doesn't change what exists, but it determines what you notice, what you emphasize, and how meaning is assigned. When the lens is tinted with fear, the world appears threatening. When it's tinted with scarcity, everything looks insufficient. When it's tinted with openness, the same world reveals options that were previously invisible. What you call reality is not raw data. It's interpreted data. Notice how expectation works. If you walk into a conversation already convinced you won't be understood, you unconsciously speak differently. Your tone shifts, your body tightens. The other person responds to that signal, not to your intention. The outcome then appears to confirm your belief. Reality seems to agree with you, but it's responding to the state you brought into it. This feedback loop runs constantly. You don't experience life as it is. You experience life as filtered through your nervous system, your emotional patterns, your dominant assumptions. These internal conditions shape not only how you interpret events, but which events you even register as important. Entire possibilities pass by unnoticed because they don't match your current inner setting. There's a quiet test you can run in everyday life. Pay attention to recurring themes, similar conflicts with different people, familiar frustrations in new situations, patterns that repeat even when the context changes. When the characters change but the storyline stays the same, the common denominator isn't the world, it's the state from which you're engaging it. This doesn't mean you're causing everything in a simplistic way. It means you're co-participating. Internal states influence choices, timing, attention, tolerance, and risk. Those factors, in turn, influence outcomes. Over time, the reflection becomes convincing enough to feel like fate. Another layer of this reflection appears in how reality treats your boundaries. If you feel internally overextended, life tends to present more demands. If you feel unworthy of rest, circumstances seem to deny it. Not because the world is cruel, but because your internal signals shape what you allow, what you resist, and what you normalize. The body knows this before the mind does. Notice how different emotions produce different physical postures. Fear contracts, confidence expands. Resentment hardens, ease softens. The body broadcasts these states constantly, and the environment responds accordingly. People respond, opportunities respond, even obstacles respond. This is why trying to fix the external world without addressing the internal state feels exhausting. You're adjusting reflections while leaving the source untouched. You may achieve short-term changes, but the underlying pattern reasserts itself. The mirror hasn't changed, only the angle did. There's also a deeper discomfort here. If reality is reflecting you, then blaming the world becomes less satisfying. Complaints lose some of their charge. Victimhood becomes harder to maintain. That resistance you feel toward this idea isn't a flaw. It's self-protection. The ego prefers a world that happens to you rather than one that responds to you. But reflection doesn't imply judgment. Reality isn't rewarding or punishing you. It's mirroring coherence or incoherence, alignment or friction. When your internal signals are mixed, wanting change but fearing it, seeking expansion but clinging to safety, the reflection looks chaotic. Not because life is against you, but because the signal is noisy. This brings an important distinction into focus. You don't get what you want. You get what you consistently embody, not what you affirm once, not what you understand intellectually, but what your system rehearses daily through thought, emotion, and attention. Watch how quickly this becomes practical. When you're internally rushed, time feels scarce. When you're internally resentful, cooperation disappears. When you're internally grounded, solutions feel closer. Same external clock, same world, different experience. And here's where many people misunderstand the point. They try to manipulate the reflection. They attempt to think positive while their body remains tense, or to visualize abundance while their decisions are driven by fear. The reflection doesn't respond to words, it responds to state. That raises a more precise question. If reality is responding to your internal condition, what exactly is it responding to? Thoughts alone are inconsistent. Emotions fluctuate. Intentions fade. There must be something more stable, something underlying all of them. When you observe closely, you'll notice that beneath thoughts and emotions there is a persistent tone, a baseline, a background quality of being. Some might call it mood, others identity, others energy. It's the level at which your system is tuned most of the time, and that tone acts less like a single thought and more like a signal. Once you see reality as a mirror, attention naturally shifts from managing events to understanding the signal you're broadcasting, because if the reflection is consistent, then changing the surface won't be enough. You will have to change what's being transmitted beneath words, beneath effort, beneath intention. Which leads to a deeper question that most people never stop to ask. If your life is responding like a receiver, what frequency is your consciousness actually operating on? When you think about your life, The events, the challenges, the relationships, the opportunities. What is it that connects them all? What is the unseen thread that links everything together, shaping how you experience each moment, how you react, and how you create your reality? The answer lies in an invisible point. Something so subtle yet so powerful that it determines the nature of everything you encounter, your frequency of consciousness. This frequency isn't something you can see or touch. It isn't a physical location, a sound, or an object in the world around you, but it is the most fundamental aspect of who you are. Imagine it as the underlying energy or vibration that shapes your perception, influences your thoughts, and creates the environment in which your life unfolds. It's the resonance that aligns with the events, people, and situations you encounter. And it's always there, whether you are conscious of it or not. The idea of frequency can feel abstract at first. It's easy to think of it as a concept for musicians or physicists, but your frequency is something more intimate. It's how you feel in the moment. It's the subtle, invisible tone that you emit into the world every second. And just like a radio station tuning in to different channels, your frequency aligns you with certain experiences and interactions, while filtering out others. The more you understand this, the more you realize that nothing is random. The events that unfold in your life are a direct reflection of the vibration you are emitting. When you feel confident, open, and at peace, your reality responds in ways that reinforce those feelings. Opportunities appear more effortlessly, and connections with others feel natural. On the other hand, when you are stuck in a state of fear, doubt, or scarcity, your reality seems to mirror that experience. Challenges seem harder, opportunities scarce, and people distant. This frequency isn't just about thinking positive or visualizing a better life. It's far deeper than that. It's about the vibrational state you occupy consistently. Thoughts, emotions, and beliefs are like ripples on the surface, but the frequency is the ocean beneath them. It's not just what you say to yourself, but the unspoken, often unconscious beliefs you carry about the world, about yourself, and about what is possible for you. These beliefs determine the frequency you broadcast. Take a moment to reflect on the days when everything seemed to flow effortlessly. Have you noticed that when you feel aligned, when you feel good, light, and centered, things just seem to work out? Things fall into place, and it feels as if the universe is somehow supporting you. That's your frequency working for you, aligning you with experiences that match your state. In those moments, your internal world and external reality resonate in harmony. Now think about times when you felt blocked, stuck, or frustrated. The more you focus on the problem, the more you seem to encounter resistance. People don't respond the way you expect, opportunities seem to slip away, and it feels like no matter what you do, things just aren't clicking. In these moments, your frequency is attuned to a state of disharmony. Your inner tension, doubt, or stress are creating a vibration that attracts experiences that reinforce those feelings. The universe isn't punishing you, it's simply reflecting the frequency you're transmitting. But here's the key. Changing your frequency isn't about forcing a change in external circumstances. It's not about fixing the world around you. It's about shifting your internal state, the feelings you carry, the beliefs you hold, and the vibrations you emit. This is why so many people get frustrated when they try to change their life without addressing their frequency. They focus on external circumstances, which are ultimately just reflections, without realizing that the source lies within. Imagine your consciousness like a dial, like an old-fashioned radio. When you turn the dial to a frequency of peace, love, and abundance, your reality tunes into a channel that reflects those qualities. But when you are stuck on the frequency of fear, doubt, or scarcity, you'll attract experiences that reflect that state. The key is that this dial is always within your control. You have the power to shift it, but only when you become aware of it. This is why the journey of awakening feels so disorienting at first. You start to see that the external world isn't as fixed as it once seemed. You realize that it's a reflection of your inner state, and the power to change your life starts to feel more within your reach. But it also feels unsettling, because it means that the world isn't happening to you, it's responding to you. It requires a deeper level of responsibility and awareness. Now, you might ask, why is it so hard to change my frequency? Why does it feel like I can't just shift out of my old patterns? This is where the challenge lies. Changing your frequency requires a certain level of awareness and intention. It's not enough to simply say, I want things to change. You must shift your internal vibration at the core level. This means letting go of the stories you've been telling yourself, the fears you've been holding on to, and the beliefs that have kept you locked in place. Here's where most people get stuck. They believe that changing their frequency means denying their current experience or forcing themselves to feel a certain way. But the truth is, you can't simply bypass your feelings or pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. True change comes when you acknowledge your current state, allow yourself to feel whatever is present, and then choose to gently shift toward a different frequency. This shift happens in layers. It's not a one-time event, but a continuous process of becoming more aware of your internal state and choosing to tune into a higher frequency. The more you practice this, the more you begin to see the world responding to you in ways you never imagined. You may start to notice small shifts first, more opportunities, better relationships, more ease. Over time, the shifts become more profound, and you begin to realize that your frequency is creating a life that you are learning to consciously design. But even with this awareness, the challenge remains. As you try to raise your frequency, there will be moments of resistance, doubts, and old patterns resurfacing. These are the places where you've been tuned into lower frequencies for a long time. The key isn't to fight them, but to understand that they are simply echoes of past frequencies, and you now have the power to change the station. And with that understanding, the question emerges once again. If your life is responding to your frequency, what station are you tuned into right now? At some point on this path, the mind becomes both your greatest ally and your most subtle obstacle. You read, listen, connect ideas, recognize patterns. Concepts begin to stack neatly. Consciousness, ego, conditioning, frequency, awareness, everything starts to make sense. And yet, something essential doesn't move. Life still reacts the same way. The body still tightens in familiar moments. The same emotional loops quietly return. This is where many seekers get confused. The mind is excellent at mapping territory it has already visited. It can describe, analyze, and categorize experience with remarkable precision. But awakening doesn't happen inside a description. It happens inside direct contact. And the mind, by its nature, stands one step removed from contact. Understanding feels productive. It gives the sensation of progress. Each new insight creates a small rush of clarity, a momentary sense of expansion. But notice how quickly the mind turns that clarity into a possession. I get it now. I understand this. The insight becomes an object, and the mind moves on to collect the next one. Awakening doesn't accumulate that way. The mistake isn't thinking. The mistake is believing that thinking is the doorway. The mind wants to grasp awakening the same way it grasps a problem. Break it down, define it, solve it. But consciousness isn't a problem to be solved. It's the space in which problems appear. Here's a simple observation. When something truly shifts in you, a deep release, a moment of presence, a sense of being fully here, does it arrive through analysis? Or does it arrive when analysis drops away? Usually it's the second. The shift happens when the mind loosens its grip, even briefly. The mind is trained to seek certainty. Awakening requires tolerance for uncertainty. The mind wants answers. Awakening invites attention. The mind wants to know why. Awakening asks, what is happening right now before the explanation? This is why people can study these ideas for years and still feel unchanged. They are awake conceptually, but asleep experientially. They can explain the map, but have never stood in the landscape. And the mind, clever as it is, can imitate depth without surrendering control. Notice how often you substitute insight for presence. You recognize a pattern and immediately explain it instead of feeling it. You label an emotion instead of allowing it to move. You understand your fear, your trauma, your conditioning, yet the body continues to respond as if nothing has changed. That's not failure. It's a mismatch of tools. The mind operates in time. It references past experiences and projects future outcomes. Awakening happens now, not in memory, not in anticipation. Now. The mind can point to now, but it cannot inhabit it. The moment it tries, it turns now into an idea. This creates a quiet frustration. You know all the right language. You can talk about awareness, surrender, presence. But when life presses you, when something triggers you, threatens you, or exposes vulnerability, the intellect collapses, old reactions take over, and the mind feels betrayed as if it did everything right. But it was never meant to do everything. There's also a subtle identity trap here. The one who understands. This identity feels refined, elevated, safe. It keeps you above the messiness of raw experience. But awakening isn't clean, it's intimate. It brings you into direct contact with sensations, emotions, and impulses you've been trained to manage from a distance. Pay attention to moments when you immediately explain instead of stay. Explanation creates distance. Presence dissolves it. The mind prefers distance because distance feels like control. This doesn't mean the mind is an enemy. It means it has a proper role. The mind is a translator, not a gatekeeper. It can articulate what's already been lived, but it cannot live it for you. When it tries, it replaces experience with commentary. This is why instructions that sound simple, be present, feel the body, notice the breath, can feel strangely difficult. There's nothing complex about them intellectually. The difficulty lies in letting go of mental dominance. The mind resists stepping aside because stepping aside feels like disappearing. Another important nuance: the mind thrives on effort. Awakening deepens through allowing. Effort creates tension. Allowing creates space. The mind hears this and immediately tries to allow correctly, turning surrender into another project. And the loop continues. If you watch closely, you'll see that the moments of deepest clarity often arrive unexpectedly, in stillness, in exhaustion, in beauty, in pain. Not because you figured something out, but because something softened. The mind loosened its grip, and awareness came forward on its own. This is unsettling for the mind because it means control isn't the lever. Attention is. Sensitivity is. Willingness to be with what is, without immediately turning it into something else. And here's the pivot most people miss. As long as awakening is treated as something to understand, it remains safely distant. But the moment you recognize that understanding is secondary, something else becomes relevant: your direct relationship with discomfort. Because if the mind can't lead the way, something else must. And that something else isn't comfortable, polished, or conceptual. It lives in sensation, emotion, and the places you usually rush past. Which brings us to a quieter, more confronting truth. The very things you try to avoid, suppress, or fix might not be obstacles at all. They might be the entry points consciousness has been waiting for. There is a reason certain things get under your skin more than others. Not everything that's unpleasant has the same weight. Some irritations pass through quickly, barely leaving a trace. Others linger. They replay in your mind. They tighten your chest, shorten your breath, harden your tone. These are the ones you usually try to get rid of as fast as possible. And yet, those are rarely random. What truly bothers you has a specific signature. It doesn't just annoy you, it hooks you. It feels personal, charged, disproportionate to the situation. A comment someone made, a delay, a rejection, a recurring fear. The intensity of your reaction is the clue. It points to something in you that is already alive, already active, already asking for attention. Most people treat these moments as problems to eliminate. They distract themselves, justify their reaction, blame someone else, or rush to fix the feeling. Relief becomes the goal. But relief, while understandable, often closes the very door that discomfort is trying to open. Discomfort is not the enemy of awakening. Avoidance is. Notice how quickly the mind steps in when something bothers you. It explains, it judges, it narrates. This shouldn't be happening. They're wrong. I can't deal with this right now. These thoughts feel protective, but they also keep you at a distance from the raw experience. They wrap the sensation in story and carry it away from the body. But the body is where the signal lives. There is information embedded in what disturbs you, information the mind cannot access through analysis alone. The sensation itself, the tightening, the heat, the heaviness, is not random. It's a form of communication. Something in your system is meeting the edge of its current capacity. This is why the same trigger doesn't bother everyone equally. What passes unnoticed for one person feels overwhelming to another. The difference isn't strength or weakness, it's relevance. The trigger is touching something unfinished, something unintegrated, something that hasn't yet found space to move. Here's a quiet shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" ask, "What part of me is being activated right now?" Not to fix it, not to improve it, just to see it clearly. The question itself creates space. When you stay with what bothers you without suppressing it and without acting it out, you may notice something surprising. Beneath irritation, there is often fear. Beneath anger, there is grief. Beneath restlessness, there is longing. These layers aren't obvious because they were never meant to be efficient. They were meant to be felt. The mind prefers comfort. Consciousness expands through contact. This doesn't mean indulging emotional chaos or spiraling into reaction. It means allowing sensation to complete its movement instead of freezing it with explanation. When a feeling is allowed to be felt fully, without resistance, it changes on its own. Not because you forced it to, but because energy that is met no longer needs to shout. What bothers you most often sits at the border of your known self. It marks the place where your current identity can no longer hold everything that wants to be expressed. That's why it feels threatening. Expansion always feels like disruption before it feels like freedom. Think about the patterns that repeat in your life. The same frustration showing up in different forms. The same emotional knot appearing in new contexts. These are not punishments. They are invitations, resurfacing because the message hasn't been fully received yet. There is also a layer of honesty required here. Sometimes what bothers you exposes a truth you've been avoiding, a misalignment, a boundary you haven't honored, a desire you've minimized. In those moments, discomfort feels dangerous because it challenges the image you've been maintaining. But images are fragile. Awareness is not. When you stop treating discomfort as a malfunction and start relating to it as feedback, your relationship with reality shifts. You no longer rush to silence the signal. You listen. And in that listening, something in you begins to reorganize. This is where the mind often tries to regain control. It wants to categorize the feeling, label it, resolve it quickly. But expansion doesn't happen on the mind's timeline. It happens on the body's rhythm, slower, deeper, more honest. You may notice resistance even to this idea, a sense that staying with discomfort will make things worse, that fear is understandable. But notice that what you resist tends to persist, while what you meet tends to soften. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. And here's the crucial link. As you allow what bothers you to be felt without turning away, your internal state begins to shift. Subtly at first, a little more space, a little less reactivity, a slightly wider tolerance for uncertainty. That shift doesn't stay inside you. It changes how you move, how you speak, how you respond. And reality notices. Because when you stop fighting the internal signal, the external world no longer needs to press as hard to get your attention. Situations begin to reorganize. Triggers lose some of their charge. Patterns loosen. But this is rarely smooth. When you start meeting what you once avoided, something else tends to happen. The world doesn't immediately reward you. In fact, it may push back. Old dynamics intensify. Familiar comforts feel less satisfying. It can seem as though life is resisting your movement, and that resistance is not random. The moment you begin to act with real awareness, something curious tends to happen, not later, not after a big breakthrough, almost immediately. Life seems to push back. Plans get disrupted, old emotions resurface, people react differently to you. Situations that were once manageable suddenly feel heavier, more complex, more demanding. This resistance isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're no longer moving unconsciously. Autopilot is efficient. It's built from habits, expectations, and predictable responses. When you live inside it, reality knows how to interact with you. Your reactions are familiar, your boundaries are known, your patterns are easy to anticipate. The system, social, emotional, psychological, has adapted to the version of you that runs automatically. When you begin to step out of that mode, even slightly, coherence is disturbed. Notice how small the change can be. You pause before reacting. You don't explain yourself immediately. You feel an emotion without acting it out. From the inside, this feels like clarity. From the outside, it can feel like disruption. The old feedback loops no longer close as neatly, and reality responds by amplifying pressure. This is often misinterpreted as failure. People think, "I tried being more aware, and things got worse." But what actually happened is that the unconscious agreements you were participating in are no longer being honored in the same way. Systems resist change not because they're malicious, but because they're optimized for stability. Resistance is a stabilizing force. You can see this clearly in relationships. When you stop playing a familiar role, others may feel unsettled. They might question you, challenge you, or attempt to pull you back into old dynamics. Not necessarily out of ill intent, but because your change disrupts their sense of predictability. Your awareness exposes the pattern simply by no longer feeding it. Internally, the same thing happens. Old thoughts return with more intensity. Doubts that seemed resolved resurface. Emotional waves feel stronger, not weaker. This doesn't mean you're regressing. It means unconscious material is losing its invisibility. When you're on autopilot, these patterns run quietly in the background. When you slow down, you hear them. The nervous system also reacts. Awareness introduces novelty, and novelty can feel unsafe at first. Even positive change can register as threat. The body asks, "Can we really let go of what we know?" Tension increases, not because awareness is harmful, but because familiarity is being challenged. This is why many people abandon the shift at this stage. They confuse resistance with a warning. They return to old habits for relief. Autopilot welcomes them back with comfort and predictability. Nothing changes, but nothing threatens to either. But if you stay present through the resistance, something important becomes visible. You begin to see how much of your life was being held together by unconscious effort, how much energy it took to maintain old patterns, how many reactions were automatic rather than chosen. Resistance reveals dependency. Pay attention to the quality of the resistance. Is it loud, dramatic, and emotional, or subtle like procrastination, distraction, or self-doubt? Often it's the second. Autopilot doesn't always fight directly. It seduces you back with busyness, with urgency, with the feeling that awareness can wait. There's also a social layer to this. A more conscious presence changes the rhythm of interactions. Silence becomes more noticeable. Superficial conversations feel heavier. People may project discomfort onto you because your presence no longer confirms their own autopilot. This can feel isolating if you're not expecting it. But isolation at this stage isn't abandonment, it's recalibration. Here's a key distinction. Resistance doesn't mean stop. It means slow down and stay attentive. When you push against resistance aggressively, you strengthen it. When you collapse back into habit, you reinforce it. But when you observe it, internally and externally, without immediately reacting, something new becomes possible. Reality tests coherence. If awareness is only conceptual, resistance overwhelms it. If awareness is embodied, resistance becomes informative. You start to notice where your attention wavers, where old identities try to reassert control, where fear disguises itself as practicality. This phase often feels messy because clarity and confusion coexist. You see more, but you're not yet stable in what you see. Old structures are loosening, but new ones haven't formed. The mind wants resolution. Reality offers tension instead. And tension has a purpose. It exposes where you are still divided. where intention and embodiment don't fully align, where awareness is present, but trust is not. If you expect awakening to feel immediately peaceful, resistance will feel like a contradiction. But awakening is not the absence of friction. It's the ability to remain present within it. Friction doesn't disappear, your relationship to it changes. As you stay with this resistance, something subtle begins to shift. The pushback becomes less personal. You stop interpreting it as a message about your worth or direction. It becomes a signal that a deeper reorganization is underway, and that's when another realization quietly emerges. If resistance appears every time you move out of autopilot, then awakening isn't a single moment of clarity. It's a process that unfolds in stages, each one revealing a new layer of unconsciousness beneath the last. Because the truth is, you don't wake up all at once. There's a quiet myth that circulates beneath most spiritual conversations. The idea that awakening is a single event, a moment where everything suddenly clicks, confusion dissolves, and life is permanently transformed. A before and an after, sleep and then light. This story is appealing because it promises certainty. It suggests an end point, but it doesn't match lived experience. Awakening doesn't arrive like a switch flipping on. It unfolds more like dawn. At first, nothing seems different. The world looks the same. Your life continues. But something subtle has shifted. You notice things you didn't notice before. Small reactions, automatic thoughts, emotional undercurrents. Awareness expands just enough to reveal what was already there, running quietly in the background. This can be disorienting. You expected relief, but instead you see more complexity. You expected clarity, but instead you see layers. That doesn't mean awakening failed. It means it started. Each layer of awakening exposes a deeper layer of unconsciousness beneath it. Not as a punishment, but as a natural progression. You can only see what you have the capacity to hold. As awareness grows, the field widens. What was once invisible becomes obvious. What was once manageable becomes questionable. This is why people often say, "I thought I had already worked through this." And they're right. They did, at that level. Awakening doesn't erase previous work. It outgrows it. The same pattern can reappear not because you're going backward, but because you're seeing it from a deeper angle. Think of it like cleaning a window. The first pass removes the obvious dirt. The view improves, light comes through. But as the glass becomes clearer, subtler smudges appear. If you stop at the first improvement, you never see them. If you keep going, it can feel like the window is getting dirtier when in fact your vision is getting sharper. This is where many people become discouraged. They mistake repetition for failure. They believe awakening should make life simpler, not more nuanced. But simplicity is the result, not the starting point. Before integration comes exposure. Another overlooked truth is that different parts of you awaken at different speeds. Insight may arrive before embodiment. Awareness may expand before emotional patterns catch up. You might see a behavior clearly while still feeling compelled to repeat it. That gap can be frustrating, but it's also honest. It shows that awakening is not just cognitive, it's neurological, emotional, and somatic. The nervous system needs time to recalibrate. This layered process also explains why certainty comes and goes. One day you feel grounded, clear, aligned. The next day doubt returns. Old questions resurface. The mind wonders if any of this is real. These fluctuations aren't signs that awakening is unstable. They're signs that identification is loosening. Certainty gives way to curiosity. Fixed answers give way to direct observation. There's a humility built into this process. Each time you think you've arrived, life gently shows you another edge. Not to mock you, but to keep awareness moving. Awakening stagnates when it becomes an identity. "I am awake" is often followed by a deeper invitation to let go of who you think you are. This unfolding also changes how you relate to others. You begin to see that people aren't at different levels in a linear hierarchy. They're awake in different areas and asleep in others. You may be deeply aware emotionally, but still reactive in certain relationships. Someone else may be intellectually clear, but disconnected from their body. Awakening isn't a ladder, it's a terrain, and like any terrain, it has valleys as well as peaks. There are moments when awareness feels expansive, effortless, alive, and there are moments when it feels heavy, confronting, slow. Both belong. The mistake is assuming that only the expansive moments count. Often, the most significant shifts happen in the quieter phases, when nothing dramatic seems to be occurring. Integration is subtle work. As awakening unfolds in layers, your relationship with progress changes. You stop measuring growth by how good you feel and start noticing how honestly you meet what's here. Reactivity may still arise, but it resolves faster. Discomfort may still appear, but it doesn't define you. You begin to trust the process rather than chase a destination. This trust is not blind faith, it's experiential. You've seen enough cycles to recognize the pattern: expansion, exposure, integration, again and again. Each time the field of awareness grows a little wider and something else begins to shift. You stop asking, "When will I be fully awake?" and start noticing how each moment invites a different quality of presence. Awakening becomes less about reaching a final state and more about responding consciously to what is emerging now. This changes how you relate to effort. You no longer try to force awakening to happen faster. You respect its rhythm. You understand that insight without embodiment is incomplete, and embodiment without patience is unstable. But this layered process also raises a practical question. If awakening unfolds gradually, and if awareness deepens through lived experience rather than sudden revelation, then what actually accelerates integration? What helps these layers align rather than repeat endlessly? At a certain point, you begin to notice that shifts don't happen because you understand more, but because you begin to live differently. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but consistently, and that's where the next realization begins to take shape. Because as awareness stabilizes, even slightly, the way you show up in the world starts to change. And when that happens, reality doesn't just reflect you, it responds in new ways. There comes a point where this stops being an idea and starts becoming observable. Not dramatic, not mystical, not announced. You simply notice that the same world is responding to you differently. Conversations unfold with less friction. Decisions feel cleaner. Situations that once drained you no longer hook you in the same way. Nothing out there has been fixed, yet something fundamental has shifted. That shift is frequency. Your frequency is not a mood you adopt for a few minutes. It's the dominant state your system returns to when nothing is forcing it in a particular direction. It's how you inhabit your body, how you hold uncertainty, how you relate to tension. And when that baseline changes, the chain reaction is real, measurable, and unavoidable. Start with attention. When your frequency shifts, your attention reorganizes. You stop scanning for threat as often. You notice different details. You respond instead of reacting. This alone changes outcomes. People feel it. Opportunities emerge because you're no longer overlooking them. Problems resolve faster because you're not amplifying them internally before engaging. This isn't optimism. It's signal clarity. When your internal signal is coherent, reality responds with less noise. Situations that once felt chaotic begin to sort themselves, not because life became easier, but because you stopped adding interference. You show up with fewer mixed messages, less wanting and resisting at the same time. Your decisions also change. A shift in frequency alters what feels tolerable, desirable, or acceptable. You stop forcing yourself into situations that require constant self-betrayal. You say no sooner, you pause longer, you choose differently, often without making a big deal out of it. These small decisions accumulate quickly, and the external landscape reorganizes around them. This is where literally matters. Different choices lead to different timelines, different conversations, different responses from others, different doors opening or closing. When your frequency changes, you don't just feel different, you act differently. And action, even subtle action, reshapes reality. There's also a relational component. People unconsciously respond to your state, not your words. When your frequency is grounded, you don't need to convince or defend as much. Interactions soften. Some relationships deepen, others fall away. This can feel unsettling at first, but it's not loss, it's alignment. Reality adjusts to match the signal you're holding. Notice how effort changes. When you operate from a higher level of coherence, effort becomes more efficient. You stop pushing against yourself. Tasks that once felt heavy feel simpler, not because they changed, but because internal resistance decreased. Energy that was spent on self-conflict becomes available for movement. This is often mistaken for luck, but luck is just what coherence looks like from the outside. There's also a feedback loop here. As reality responds more smoothly, trust increases. When trust increases, the system relaxes further. When the system relaxes, frequency stabilizes. This loop reinforces itself, just as fear-based loops once did. You didn't escape cause and effect. You changed which loop you're inside. It's important to be precise. Changing frequency doesn't mean avoiding difficulty. Challenges still appear. Uncertainty still exists. The difference is in how they're metabolized. Difficulty no longer defines you. It informs you. You move through friction without turning it into identity. And here's a critical detail many people miss. Frequency shifts are not maintained by effort. They're maintained by consistency, by returning again and again to presence instead of reaction, to sensation instead of story, to choice instead of compulsion. This is not glamorous work, but it's effective. At some point, you realize you're no longer trying to change reality. You're responding to it from a different place. And reality, being relational rather than static, adjusts accordingly. This is why external change often lags behind internal change. The signal shifts first, then behavior, then patterns, then circumstances. If you expect immediate external confirmation, you'll doubt the process. But if you watch patiently, the evidence accumulates. Old problems lose relevance. New questions appear. Your concerns become more refined. You stop obsessing over outcomes and start noticing alignment. The quality of your experience becomes the metric, not the quantity of achievements. And perhaps the most telling sign, you feel less compelled to prove anything. When frequency changes, urgency drops. You're not rushing toward awakening or running from discomfort. You're inhabiting your life more fully, and life responds with greater precision. At this stage, creation stops being reactive. You're no longer just responding to the world as it happens to you. You're participating in how it unfolds, which leads to the final distinction that quietly changes everything. The difference between living as a reactor to circumstances and living as a conscious creator within them. At every moment, you are presented with a choice. Continue reacting to life, letting external circumstances dictate your experience, or step into a place of conscious creation where your frequency leads the way. The world will keep offering its patterns, its noise, its distractions, but the more you align with your true frequency, the more you realize that you are not merely a passenger on this journey, you are the creator of it. The path ahead is one of awareness and choice. You can continue to be at the mercy of habitual reactions, or you can choose to craft your reality from the inside out, shaping it with presence, intention, and alignment. If you're ready to step into that space of conscious creation, I invite you to declare your commitment by writing this in the comments. I choose to create my reality. And if you found value in this video and want to explore more, be sure to check out the videos on the screen. They'll guide you deeper into the path of transformation.